World leaders are condemning an Israeli airstrike in Gaza that killed at least 7 aid workers from the World Central Kitchen. The IDF says the strike should not have happened and that it was, quote, a mistake that followed a misidentification. Jonathan Panikoff joins me now. He's the director of the Scowcroft Middle East Security Initiative at the Atlantic Council. Thank you so much for being with me. Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, said these kinds of things happen in war with respect to the death of the aid workers. But the spokesperson for the UN Secretary General said this is happening specifically because of the way the Israelis are carrying out this war. Can you help us untangle those two statements?
Thanks for letting me be with you this evening. Oh, look, I think certainly there's some truth for what the prime minister is saying. There's always significant tragedies in war, but the problem is it's happening far too often. Humanitarian aid is not getting into Gaza nearly in the amount that it needs to get in. And we saw only a month ago a massive tragedy as hundreds were killed in a stampede. Those types of occurrences consistently happening tells you that there's something wrong in the security operations and the coordination operations. And I think we saw Israel admit that today by the fact that they're going to stand up, they've said, a new operations center to coordinate with humanitarian organizations providing aid.
This happens, obviously, in the context of the Biden administration trying to walk Israel either away from the idea of a full-scale invasion of Rafah or at least kind of, maybe this is the wrong word, but micromanage what Israel's going to be doing. How do you see that negotiation? And is it possible to pull Israel back from what it appears to want to do in Rafah?
I think it's really a question of how Israel approaches Rafah, not whether or not the U.S. is okay with them doing it. In other words, I think if Israel said, look, we're going to move to a much more precise, smaller, counterterrorism-like operation that they've been saying they're going to move to for a number of months now, I think the U.S. would say, okay, we're okay with that. What's not going to be okay is a multi-battalion or even multi-brigade operation like we saw in Khan Yunis, like we saw in Gaza City. I think for the U.S., that's going to be a red line, and that's the type of negotiation that you're seeing today when you've had discussions between senior Biden administration officials and Israeli officials, that in which the U.S. officials said, look, the Israeli proposal of how to move the population up north to get them out of Rafah itself isn't sufficient. So we're not there yet. I think the negotiations are going to be ongoing for a little bit here.
And let me hurry to the next question, which is the Israeli strike in Syria on Iranian, the Iranian diplomatic facility. You would think Israel's busy enough with one more. This seems to be quite an escalatory move to open up possibly a whole new one. How do you read this situation?
I think Israel's strike is consistent with what they have done over the years in trying to target very senior leaders of Iran's guards, the Quds Force, the terrorism wing. Mohammad Zahedi was one of those leaders, probably the commander in Lebanon and in Syria. But obviously, it's going to be interpreted in a way that this is escalatory, whether Israel intended it to be or not. The one piece of good news, perhaps, if you can call it that, is Iran really has tried hard not to make this a regional war. It's terrified of the Iranian homeland being attacked or of expending its biggest proxy in Hezbollah right now in a war with Israel. So hopefully it can be contained, but obviously it's going to be viewed as escalatory and a big strike.
Jonathan Panikoff with the Atlantic Council. Thank you so much, Jonathan.